I grew up in Grenada, Mississippi, which is about 100 miles south of Memphis and about 100 miles north of Jackson, Mississippi. My mother and my stepfather moved to Flint, Michigan, and then from there to Chicago. And they thought Chicago was a little rough, so I had to stay back in Mississippi to go to school. And every summer I would come back to Chicago. And I could never forget my grandmother saying, "I will be glad to get you back to your mother because this is a dangerous place." And she always warned me to give deference to white people, which I thought was crazy, but, she says, you'll get killed. They'll kill you. It was harrowing after we heard the news of the murder of Emmett Till. We discussed it in class, at school. We discussed it in the church, at Sunday school. And people were really frightened by it, and especially after we saw the Jet magazine photograph of the body. It was absolutely horrifying. And I think there was not a single student in my classes that did not understand it and were not horrified by it. And in each case, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts constantly warned us of the danger of being assaulted and killed even by vicious white people in the South. And then, of course, following that murder, there were several other lynchings of African Americans in Mississippi. And the impact of those murders, those assassinations, those lynchings, just wore on me extremely badly. And I always said, if I were in position, I would do something about it. And of course, we read about the NAACP and the beginning of SNCC and all those things. And one of the things that I wanted to do as soon as I got out of Mississippi was to join the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which I did, and eventually became one of the youth leaders in SNCC in Chicago. The first major demonstration in Chicago that I participated in was when the NAACP had its national convention in Chicago. And that's when I met the core group of SNCC. And we marched downtown, and the speaker on the podium was Mayor Daley. And we booed him. We shut him down because he said there are no slums in Chicago. And we were protesting against the slums in the city. And of course, we were demonstrating against segregated schools, police brutality, everything that was wrong, and Daley. And then later, when Dr. King came to Chicago in '66, there were several African-American aldermen and other elected officials who met him at the airport and told him he was not welcome to Chicago, right? And so there were a few African-American ministers who embraced him and allowed him to speak at their churches. And of course, we went to hear him and we marched with him. I was very proudly marched with him in downtown Chicago and thought came home and told my mother, I marched with Dr. King. We had demonstrations all over the city. In Gage Park, the most famous one where Dr. King was hit by a rock. He said in effect that this was the most vicious city he'd ever been in. And when Dr. King was killed, I remember vividly the night that he was assassinated. I was in a class in the master's program in urban studies. I came out of the classroom, went down to my car, turned on the radio, and it was all over the news that he had been assassinated. As soon as I got home, I turned on television, and people were crying and weeping. The next day, all hell broke loose. Riots all over the city, particularly on the west side. Burned houses, burned stores, riots, and of course they brought in the National Guard. I think that incident, the murder of King, and of course the fact that he had been in Chicago, and then later in 1969, the murder of Fred Hampton in his bed in Chicago. those two incidents, I think, pushed the city African Americans into a much more radical mode, and we began to organize on a serious level.